Well, thank you, Naomi and Bart. Our society's leader, Bart Worden, will be speaking today. This is Bart's 21st year as the Ethical Culture Society of Westchester's leader, and he has recently increased his time with our congregation, which has afforded him more opportunities to work on projects and engage with people in the larger community. He is also the executive director of the American Ethical Union, the National Federation of Ethical Culture and Ethical Humanist Societies. And in that role, he works to spread the joys of ethical humanism to new people in new places and to support the activities of our ethical societies across the United States. Bart's theme for this year is Living Positively, an essential element of ethical humanism. Bart's address today is titled, Dealing with Anger, Frustration, and Impatience. Please join me in welcoming Bart to the podium.
Thank you. We now have an adjustable podium, which is excellent, because distance is all the rage when it comes to being able to see what I'm doing. So in order to take a positive approach to life, we must find ways to come to terms with what life presents us. Sometimes that's easy. So yesterday, when I went for a lovely walk along the Croton Aqueduct, the sun was shining, the breeze was light, temperature was warm, the ground wasn't muddy, and my human and canine companions were very pleasing to be with. Easy to deal with. If only life were like that. Most of the time, all the time, who knows? I guess it would probably get boring if it was that pleasant all the time, wouldn't it? No, I don't see heads nodding. Okay, so the thing is, let's get real, right? So we are faced with all kinds of challenges to that equanimity, right? And it's hard to go through life without having feelings of impatience and frustration and anger emerge within us, right? There's so many things that are happening outside of our own personal lives that are bound to rile us up. And when we're riled up, it's tough to live sometimes, right? I mean, people generally, when I talk to them, don't appreciate those feelings, right? They bubble up and they let people, they crash on them a bit. It brings emotional discomfort, right? And there's few rewards from emotional discomfort, right? I mean, it's bad for our health, it's bad for our sleep, it's bad for our relationships, so it's a little bit hard to figure out what's the function of having these troubling things bubble up for us. But I think there is, and that's what I want to kind of work on today. But look, in the very end, the real question we need to answer, why can't everyone be like me? Right? Almost perfect in every way, right? That's the question I imagine we're asking ourselves when we're out in the world around us, right? Why can't they be more like me? So, there's an answer to that. I doubt you're going to like it. I know I didn't. And I'm going to be offering a lot of things that you're probably going to find implausible and distressing, and so trigger alerts and all that other kind of stuff. But my intention certainly is to end well and on a good note. So I'd like to bring us home in a good place. So let's start with science. When we think about all the things that have been invented over the course of time, we often will come to think of particular people, right? Gravity? Okay. Electricity? We got Franklin? Franklin? Yeah, so, how about, electric light? Now you can do it. Right? Think about all these particular names, right? However, when you go back and look over the history of scientific discovery, what you find is that they emerge out of a much broader context, right? And that, in fact, the discoveries that we attribute to individuals are really more the product of a set of processes of many people, oftentimes. And every so often, there'll even be discoveries that happen like simultaneously by people that never talked to each other or knew each other, right? It'll just happen. And that's because we have this experience that is building around us. And when we were born into the world, we get to kind of participate in that, right? So the good news for that is we don't have to make everything up all the time, right? There's that there. The less happy news about that is, in fact, we probably don't make much stuff up, right? The things that we like to imagine ourselves as individuals, having our own thoughts and our own feelings and all those kind of things, but it's mostly borrowed or taken from others, right? And there's good reasons for that. So even individuality, right? If you think about yourself as an individual, try to do that in the absence of relation to anyone else. It's impossible, right? The only reason you can have individuality is because there are other people that you get to compare to. Right? And you wouldn't even be able to communicate that idea if there weren't a common language. In fact, you wouldn't even have that idea if there weren't a common language, right? The very ideas that we have, we've taken from the world that we live in, right? They emerge inside of us, they adhere to us over the course of time. And so the things that we come to imagine ourselves as, I'm doing my own thing, I'm et cetera, well, yeah, maybe we are, but mostly we're doing it with somebody else's stuff, almost all the time. And so pushing that envelope to real creative uniqueness is difficult, and can be the source of mental illness, right? The people I know who are most unique in this end, in other words, that they have ideas that don't connect to the ideas around them, are often in psychiatric wards, right? Because it's the connection to other people that brings value and meaning to us. Right? What is that buzzing? That's going to bug me. I thought it was the sidelights. Anyway, so this is also true of our feelings. Right? That's the part that's a little bit harder to gather, right? The way we come to feel about things is also derived from our experience of relationships and our experience of how other people have felt about things. Right? I mean, think about yourself. Do you ever have these times where you look in the mirror and you see one of your parents, kind of, or you say something, right? These are examples of how we carry forward lives of other people and the emotions of other people into our current lives. Right? And so when we have strong, powerful feelings about things, it's probably good for us to remember that even though we're responsible for them because they've emerged in us personally, we are probably not the origin of them per se. Right? We've borrowed our experience and our way of having experience even from the world around us. So when we find ourselves having these uncomfortable feelings, then we're in a bit of a tight spot, right? Because we've wound up inheriting all this stuff, and some of it isn't things that we really want to have, and yet we're kind of stuck with them. Right? And then we get held responsible. Right? That's the sad part, right? If you act on your anger, right, all the time, you're going to get punished for it, right? Even if that anger has emerged from another place. Now, why is this important? Well, for one thing is we can imagine that the atrocities that have gone before us are not us, that we would never do anything like that. But that's a lie. Those things are inside of us already. We have brought them forward because of the lives that we've had. And given the right circumstances, those things will emerge again, right? It's the legacy that we have inherited and is there for the use if that is what is determined is to do. Right? There are atrocities happening at this very second in many parts of the world. Right? They could be happening right here. I'm not saying they're going to. Right? So let's break out of this a little bit, right? So I just want to make sure that we're aware that those things that are bubbling up from us, first of all, often come unbidden to us, And second of all, though we're responsible for dealing with them, we should give ourselves a little bit of a break around how hard it is because of how much history has gone into producing them. Right? In other words, if it was easy to really live a good, ethical life and to deal with all the frustrations and angers and things of the world, we wouldn't need to be coming together. Right? It's the very fact of its difficulty that is a reason for us to be here, a reason for us to try to figure this out, a reason for us to have some level of passion for helping the world be different going forward in ways that are really good. The sociologist Arlie Hochschild in the book is Strangers in Their Own Land, and I already talked about this a bit before. But her thing was she's a very liberal person. Parents are Unitarians. She teaches at Stanford. And this is really where she feels very much at home. So she was very puzzled by the Tea Party, because the Tea Party was emerging in places like Louisiana, which has had its environment devastated by corporations, right? Especially the oil industry in particular, and other chemical industries have just really decimated Louisiana. It's in so many places, it's just really desperately bad. And yet, the Tea Party is incredibly strong there. The voters tend to be wildly conservative and support the current administration in a big way. And she was very puzzled by this, because she would think a rational person just would do it differently. They would notice that this is not good for them and would go forward. So she went to Louisiana for quite a long while and tried to get to know people and to know their stories and to get to understand how they came to the decisions and points of view and values that they were maintaining. And she came away with a lot more empathy than she went in with. And one of the things that she found really helpful was she came up with would you call it a metaphor? I don't know. But she calls it a deep story. And the deep story is one of people standing in line for the American dream. So just imagine over the horizon, the American dream awaits, and we're all queued up to get there. The thing is, some people have a better spot in line than other people do. And so for the folks that have a good spot in line, it's a little bit easier to feel like, okay, we're moving forward. I'll have a better, more financially secure life than my parents had. I'll have a home that I know I can rely on being there and that I can afford. My children can have a good life going forward. The American dream, right? But the people behind us may have a different experience, right? For them, it's seeming to take an awful long time. And why is it that that person gets to be ahead of me? If you then take that into the historical context that we have, you also have to wonder, how do people get into the line in the first place? And what happens when you look to make adjustments to that line? So in particular, the lines that people seem to be, the spots in line that people were most troubled by were, especially for the conservative white folk that she was talking to, was a sense of blacks and immigrants getting extra help to move ahead in the line, right? Or animals, for that matter, right? The protecting animals, so the animals are getting stuff before they are, right? And meanwhile, they're watching their environment crumble, they're watching their paychecks dwindle, and if anything, the line is getting longer in front of them, so they're actually moving backwards, not moving closer, and feeling more and more frustrated. Impatience, frustration, and anger. So these are all areas where our movement forward is somehow inhibited, right? And I put them in in order of desperation, I guess, on the address title, but I'd rather address them in order of appearance in the talk today. So I'll start with impatience, because that's a little bit easier to talk with and deal with. When I think of impatience, I think of times when my father and I were working together, and I was using a wrench on a bolt, and my father was standing behind me, and I could hear his foot tapping. And he knew, it's taking a long time, it's going well, what's happening there. Anyone have an experience like this? Feeling impatient? I was at the food store. The food store, I think, the food line probably is the best queue that we probably all get to be in, right? Trying to find the person at checkout that will get you through in the best round. And it's now becoming over, you try to gauge it, and et cetera. And oftentimes our impatience happens because we see a competence difference from what we'd expect, right? In other words, if you're at a fast food place and it's moving along and people are doing their things, you can see they're all in the right queue and all that kind of thing. It probably don't feel so impatient, right? Because it's kind of moving along as you would expect, but maybe somebody loses a ticket, or somebody forgets to put the buzzer on for the fryer or something like that, and it starts holding it up. And then it starts to cascade, right? And you can see people getting kind of cranked up, and then you start to feel like, wow, this fast food, what's going on here? Right? That impatience that we feel, it's our impatience, right? In other words, what are we so pressured around for that? Why do we imagine our time is so much more precious than the time of the people that are struggling to get something done that we're feeling impatient over? It's our impatience. And it's our task to find some way to deal with that so that we can be supportive of the person's potential, of what can be for other people. Right? In other words, when we behave impatiently, we add to the stress of situations. We don't reduce the stress. And we're really inclined to leave people feeling too anxious to do a really good job as they would want to. They'll be hurrying. They'll start to feel impatient with themselves. Right? Maybe they are already. What do we do when we feel impatient that helps us relax ourselves enough so that we can be present with the situation and just be there? Now, frustration is harder, right? Because frustration comes when we are really expecting something or trying to get something done, and somebody is thwarting what we're trying to do. Think about those merge lines when you're trying to get through the toll booths or whatever those things, right? And you can see people, the way to do this, by the way, is really to imagine that in let's say there's 3 lines going to 2, that there is one line that needs to go fastest, another line that needs to go kind of fast, and a third line that needs to go slower. All right? So what's the line that needs to go fastest? The line that has the most cars in it, right? So that's the car. So everyone's kind of merging over. But every time you merge over, you're slowing the line down, right? So the person in the front really needs to step on it to make enough room for people to merge in, right? But when people are in that line, they're not so happy about people merging in because that's slowing their progress, right? Meanwhile, the line that is actually the fastest is the one that is merging, right? Because that line is getting shorter all the time, right? So that line, to speed up everybody's progress, should be the slowest, right? There should be as many gaps as possible in that line so you're not slowing down the line next to you, and so they're not slowing down the line next to them. Everyone following me so far? All right. Do we drive that way? Right? And what happens? You're in that lane and you see somebody like, let's say people are following that pattern, right? there's always going to be somebody who just hates that, right? They're going so slow. This line, I can see their space. They should be moving. They're honking their horn. They're flashing their lights. They're driving up on the side of the thing and going all the way up to the cones so they can just merge at the last second, right? They're stopping, and they're stopping everybody, right? Frustration. When people do things that keep you from what you want. And that's just a stupid example. But don't we get riled up about it? I mean, people have been killed over these kind of things, right? So just imagine when it gets to be more of a major frustration, right? When somebody is not supporting your project at work, right? When somebody is not doing their bit at home for things that you really need to get done. When people are letting you down in the legislature because they're dragging their feet or they're putting things, roadblocks into things that you'd like to see accomplished. Frustration emerges. What do you do with it? And that's a tougher one, isn't it? Because if you go with where your frustration tends to want you to go, conflict will arise. And conflict will arise in a way that you'll probably find is not smoothing the path toward the resolution that you want. And this has been a very difficult spot to deal with personally, I have to say, because to be honest, I'm frustrated a fair amount. And I guess I imagine I'm not a person who's easy to frustrate, right? I feel I'm kind of calm and easygoing, but that's not true. But the thing is, I don't deal with frustration all so well, and so I just kind of get quiet. But getting quiet probably isn't the best way to deal with frustration either. So you don't want to get loud, right? Because getting loud is just going to get you into a fight. You don't want to not deal with it. So what do? Well, and probably you're going to hate me for this, but I rely heavily on nonviolent communication patterns. Nonviolent communication, also known as compassionate communication. Marshall Rosenberg was a person who really kind of invented, if you can say that, but again, inventions come from a whole bunch of people, but the one who kind of came up with the way to describe it and has been promoting it for a long time before his passing a few years ago. Nonviolent communication says, people all have needs, and when their needs are getting met, they'll be pretty happy, right? And when their needs are not getting met, they'll have feelings emerge in them that will be uncomfortable. Right? So you can tell if a person's needs aren't getting met because they'll feel what? Agitated, right? Impatient, intolerant, right? They'll be mad. They'll be sad, maybe. You think of the feelings that you really wish you weren't having, and those are pretty much signs that some of your needs are not getting met. Right? So nonviolent communication is a way to look at meeting needs of people so that we can all get our needs met without further reducing the likelihood that any particular person's needs will get met. That's what makes it complicated, right? It's easy to get your needs met if you don't care if somebody else's needs are met. But the truth of the matter is, if other people's needs aren't met, it's not going to be a happy situation, right? You're not going to be where you want to be if the people around you are really unhappy, distressed, frustrated, angry, whatever those feelings are. So how do you deal with that? Well, I guess the first thing is to recognize that your needs and other people's needs aren't really in competition with each other. The needs aren't, right? Well, our needs are pretty similar, right? We need food, we need housing, we need companionship, we need a sense of meaningfulness. But those are things that don't really collide in and of themselves, right? They don't. But the way that we go about getting those needs met may, right? So if in order to get housing, we steal someone's house, well, okay, that could be a problem, right? Because now somebody's need who was being met is no longer being met, and so right? So you have it in that sense. But it's not the needs themselves that are the problem. It's the strategies we deploy to get those needs met. That's the problem there, right? And so what they would say in nonviolent communication is, let's start by first understanding what are the needs that aren't getting met, and give people the opportunity to share what those needs are. to share their experience so that we can hear it, so that we can be with them and at least have some level of empathy for what they're going through. Right? Because people don't want to be in a situation where their needs aren't getting met. Right? This is not like a voluntary thing where people are flagellating themselves on purpose. Life is happening to them. Right? If you can let people at least talk about their unhappiness and try to get some handle on the needs that aren't getting met in the midst of that unhappiness, you have a start at least being able to have a conversation. Right? So the most important way to deal with frustration is A, to listen. Right? To stop talking and to start listening. And if you are going to talk in ways that are inviting sharing of others. Right? Because that is the surest path to understanding a person's situation and to having a better sense of what's going on. This is going back again to that shared experience part. People's anger and frustration, we've got that too. Right? It's something we have in common. And so when we imagine that we're so different from these people, let's remember that even that anger is binding us together. And if we can find a way to kind of stay in touch and to listen, we have a much better chance at figuring out some pathways forward. This is especially true in terms of anger, right? Because with anger, we have the additional complication of our morality switch being flicked on. You know what a morality switch? So when you come upon a situation where something happens that you think is wrong, you'll notice yourself feeling how? Realizing? Anger. You feel anger. Superior. You may feel superior, but let's say somebody does something wrong to you. You're going to feel how? You're going to be pissed off, right? You're going to feel outraged, right? And the companion to that is a strong sense that whoever has done this needs to be punished, and that it would be wrong for them to escape punishment. Is this familiar? All right? Don't we feel this? Now, again, this, I would say, is not an ethical thing, but it is a moral thing. I say it's not ethical because it really is independent of the size and complexity of what's going on. It's very much just an internal, deeply embedded quality of organisms, because it's not just human beings. A number of animals will share this as well, where if your sense of safety or if you think things are unfair or something has been done to injure you in some kind of way, you'll want to get back at that person. And that's a tough one to deal with, right? Because getting back often winds up getting us onto a difficult slope that is difficult to get off of. Anyone here had fistfights? Fistfights? We're a very non-fighting crowd. I've actually had a few, and I got to say, they have stayed with me, and not really in a good way. However, they did remind me that A, I'm not a good fist fighter, and B, the outcome of fights is not likely to be the outcome that I am looking for. But how do you wrestle with your anger when you have this sense of superiority, right? Because you're feeling like this person has transgressed, deserves to be punished, what will happen next? And this is the toughest part, because we're guilty. In other words, if we truly have carried with us the sins of our forebears, in other words, if they reside in us, part of that morality switch is a resonation of what we know we're capable of, what we know our ancestors have participated in, and what could be in our future if we are not careful and thoughtful and dedicated to it going a different way. So it really is important when we get these things happening to remind ourselves that this interest in punishment is probably borrowed or taken, and not something that we would choose on our own if we could. And the way that we can address that is to push back, to not insist on punishment, to work instead to imagine how could someone who transgressed become back into the world of people working to live together. How can that person be made whole in a way that will help them connect with other people in ways that are not dangerous, in ways that are helping each other? It really is possible. You know, even the people that transgress badly have many moments where they're not, where they're being helpful and thoughtful and compassionate. And you may imagine that they go around all day and all night just being mean, miserable people, but that would be a very rare person indeed. For most of us, most of the time, we'll do something to try to be reasonably good. So let's help that happen. And let's start with ourselves, right? When we notice the sense of readiness to punish, let's take a deep breath. Let's remind ourselves that we really want to be part of the world that is connecting and a part of things, rather than the part of the world that is punishing and tearing. We want to be creating connections. We want to be creating goodness. And to do that means to kind of be a little bit good to ourselves as well at these times when we struggle. Right. So that's it, basically. Let's take some time to try to own that the feelings that we have are ours to deal with, but that are often coming up from other places unbidden. And that's true for all of us. And if we can find some way to keep at least pushing the envelope forward towards connection and towards working together and cooperation, we might see that things actually are better in our lives and in the lives of people around us. Thanks.